Well, I'm delighted to be here. I thank you all for coming out. It's been tough for history type meetings over the last 6 months because we just haven't been able to get people out. You know, most of the places, museums have been closed. Ada Lester told me when this book came out, and she was of great assistance in the research part of this. And she told me when I sent her a copy of the book, she said, "Boy, this is our story, and we need to have it delivered out here." And I said, "Great, let's do it." And she arranged it and has rearranged it. And boy, everybody has been so helpful in trying to get this thing off the rails. Wendy, thank you for starting us. We're going to do 6 events in the next 6 days, and this is the startup. I was about 13 when I first read about Billy. Oh, that's right. Wait a minute. Let me get this thing. Now, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'd forgotten about this. I was about 13 when I first read about Billy Dixon in this book. This is a book that he and his wife put together toward the end of his life. And boy, I was absolutely captivated by this heroic, sharpshooting buffalo hunter. Billy triggered what is and listen, I'm serious when I say this because I've done a lot of books on Western gunfighters. This was the most famous shot of the Old West at the Battle of Adobe Walls, as you know, in 1874. And only a few months later, as an Army scout, he won the Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor, at the Buffalo Wallow fight. Army, after he died, the Army tried to get civilian scouts to give it back. I was reading the caption out here, and Olive, his wife, "No, I'm not going to give it back." And she kept it, and it eventually donated it to the Panhandle Plains Museum. I wrote about him briefly in a couple of coffee table books. I think one of them's over here. Then in July of 2015, I participated in a meeting, the annual meeting of the Wild West History Association. We met in Amarillo that year, and we have 4-day meetings. And our field trip, we have a field trip day, and our field trip consisted of 4 buses and a car caravan out to Adobe Walls. Well, I'll tell you, by the way, 1 busload came from Borger, came from the Hudson County Museum. Anyway, I had been asked to provide a program about Dixon out there. And I got out there, I knew all about it, you know, but there was something about being there and seeing those plateaus, seeing where the fight had taken place, and just, you know, feeling the ghosts. And boy, oh boy, that was really something. Then a guy had an old buffalo gun, and we were allowed, for a small payment, to shoot blanks at the plateau. Got to do that. Well, I'll tell you what, after that experience, I had to write a book about Dixon. There hadn't been a biography of him, as mentioned, in over a century. Then I wasn't very far into the Billy Dixon book before I realized the extraordinary impact of Olive, his wife, tremendous importance of that woman, and thus it became a dual biography, co-starring Billy and Olive. I'll come back to her shortly. First, let me focus on the remarkable frontier exploits of a boy named Billy who ran away to the West in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War, when he was only 13. Billy never talked about himself. In fact, he didn't talk much at all. He was a very taciturn guy. And when Olive told him, you know, they were working on it, he'd agreed to open his mouth a little bit and talk about his earlier life. And she said she had to have something for his boyhood. She didn't have anything. He never had even told her the names of his parents or anything. And so he told her a little bit, and it amounts to 1 paragraph in the start of this book, and that is all. He was born in 1850 in Western Virginia, which became West Virginia during the war. And he said he was the firstborn. He had a sister, but he said his mother died after birthing number 3, so his version had it that he was the first of 3 born. Then he said his daddy died. Neither his father or mother or sister were named. So Billy and his sister were taken to the Missouri farm of an uncle. Then his sister died, he said, of typhoid fever. Within a year, he ran away from his uncle's farm and headed west. Well, the whole thing sounded fishy to me. And I enlisted the help of my brother-in-law, who is an avid genealogist. And he found that Billy was not the first of three, the third of 7 children. They all lived to adulthood. Nobody died of typhoid fever. The parents didn't die. The mother and father, incidentally, were named William and Nancy Dixon. Now we know. When Billy was a child, the entire family moved to Missouri, and from there, that's where he and another boy ran away to the rest, again, right in the middle of the war. They were taken in. And when I hear a truck come by, I'm going to raise my volume. I know what a microphone's for. Thank you, Wendy. The boys were taken in by wood choppers at camps alongside the Missouri River. The boys helped cut and stack firewood for passing steamboats. You may not know steamboats. When they had a steamboat, they used 2 cords of wood an hour. And but anyway, the Civil War was raging, and there was a terrible manpower shortage. So soon he was hired as a bullwhacker of government freight trains. The government during the war, we forget about the West during the war, but you had these frontier forts out there trying to keep a lid on war parties, and so they had to keep them supplied. And that's what he hired out to do. Those kind of freight trains had the wagons the sides were several feet tall, and they were too tall for a driver to perch up there. They were designed to hold 7,000 pounds, which is 3.5 tons. And so a bullwhacker walked alongside the oxen with a bullwhip. At first, Billy wasn't even big enough to yoke his own oxen, but he did have help from friendly colleagues, and he grew into a man with a strong physique. During the next several years, he also worked as a mule skinner. And 6 or 1.5 dozen others. There are advantages to using mules, advantages to using oxen for that. And the mule skinner rode again, you can't climb up on the wagon, so he rode the mule nearest the wagon. The wages were excellent. They doubled them during the war because of the manpower shortage. And everyone was given Army-issue firearms for the trip. He was given a Sharps carbine. And you can see how sharp these are. This is a cheap replica of one that I bought a long time ago. The mechanism is broken and everything, but I bought it a long time ago to use in class. And that was his first gun. He had never had any kind of firearm. Furthermore, they gave him a Remington Army model pistol. The Remington Army pistol I was going to bring is sitting in its scabbard on my desk at home, 550 miles from here. So sorry about that. I realized that this morning. I didn't even miss it yesterday, but alas, it looks like the real thing. It is the real thing. It'll shoot. This one won't shoot. You have to hit somebody with it. Well, anyway, by the way, he kept getting these free guns. He was an Army scout for nearly a decade, and they kept giving the scouts Army issue weapons, or even weapons they were trying out. And Billy got this odd rifle, and it's sitting in the Panhandle Plains Museum, along with everything else Olive could get her hands on. As a teamster, Billy traveled all over the frontier. We had forts in Colorado. He traveled that far, but he saw the mountains, but he had already fallen in love with the plains. He loved outdoor life. He trapped and hunted, and he proved to be a gifted marksman. He was like those kids, a little boy or a little girl can play the piano when they're 3 years old. You know, Billy's got a gun in his hand, and boy, he was something. And he practiced all the time. What did he have to do? He was just a kid on those trains, and in the evenings, they had an unlimited supply of ammunition, government issue ammunition. By 1870, Billy was hunting buffalo in Kansas, out of Dodge City. You know, Dodge was a buffalo hunter's center before it was a cow town. and he had a Sharps Big 50, much longer barrel than this. Those things weigh 12, 15 pounds. They had a trigger guard for the lever. The trigger guard was the lever. We're accustomed to see these Winchesters with these great big old levers, and they had to open the breech to reload these things. These things are single shot weapons, and so the lever that opened the breech was the trigger guard. The buffalo hunters preferred a Creedmoor tang sight. I don't know what was on that. I was afraid to win. I'll get this in. Oh, good. Thank you. I'll let you. I think there's more on it. If you want to read the rest of it, you okay. Thank you. Yeah, there was some more on here. Yeah. The Creedmoor tang sight. The tang on one of these guns is this narrow part of the handle like this. And the Creedmoor sight was the one preferred by most buffalo hunters. It attached to this, and you could gear it up or down, and thus aim for the for distance. But the good thing about this, these guys shot at incredible distances. They knew that if they fired these guns off very close, it would stampede the buffalo, and they wanted to just shoot them down while they were just standing there grazing. So they tended to shoot from about 500 yards. Now imagine that. We're talking about 5 football fields. And they did that because, first of all, they did not shoot for their head. If you go look at a buffalo skull in a museum, you see how I'm like trying to shoot that thing right there. And those soft lead slugs would just bounce off of their forehead. So they shot for this area right here, and they were trying to get into their vitals, lungs or heart, and then the animal would just drop, and then they'd shoot another one. And again, at 500 yards, for crying out loud. And so at that distance, they needed windage. And the Creedmoor tang sight, the Creedmoor was about one of those early sights that would also move right or left a little bit, so you could adjust for windage, which they needed to do at that kind of range. He was pretty good with that. And one of the great joys of getting to do this book, I went to museums, including some out here, that allowed me to look at their buffalo guns. I was taking pictures of them for the book. I didn't know what I'd use. And in several cases, we had to remove the guns from cases. I got to handle some of them with, and a couple of times without gloves. I'm not going to tell you, let me do that. And I also went up to the NRA Museum. I've been a member a long, long time, but I went up there for the first time. It's in Springfield, Missouri, and I had understood that they had these great displays on buffalo hunting, and sure enough they did, and there are some pictures of that in my book. Now, within a few years, buffalo had disappeared from Kansas, but they hunted them out. But Billy scouted out a vast herd in the Texas Panhandle, which is uninhabited up here. So soon, several Dodge City merchants went together and they gambled on establishing a buffalo hunters trading post in the Panhandle, because they knew they were fixing to go out of business anyway if they stayed in Dodge City. A caravan came out here. They located a little community about a mile or so north of the ruins of an earlier trading post that William Bent had built some decades earlier, and they had called it Adobe Walls. There was a good creek down there. The Canadian River was nearby, and the soil was such that you could make adobe bricks. That's not the case everywhere, including the site they picked about a mile to the north. It had a creek there, but they had to build sod huts out of that thing. By the way, a decade earlier, as I'm sure many of you know, in 1864, Colonel Kit Carson led an army column against a big Indian force in the first Battle of Adobe Walls, and I'm going to have the privilege of talking about it in Pampa. I'm going to get to be in Pampa and do this program Thursday night, and I'm going to do the Kit Carson 1864 battle on Friday night. in 1874, these guys built 3 sod buildings, and you've got they built 2 big old stores, and cafes, and so forth. You could buy anything at those stores, and there was a saloon there. And then a 4th building was the picket fence, the picket structure that was a blacksmith shop, and it was a small structure. It wasn't a very good place to fight from. Although there were no adobe buildings, the name adobe walls stuck. Buffalo hunters and skinners, they set up hunting camps all over the district, and then whenever they needed something, gun broke, need more ammunition, needed more provisions and stuff, well, they came into adobe walls for a couple of days, drank a lot of whiskey, and then they would go back. Well, Billy Dixon happened to be there on Sunday morning, June 27, 1874. He was at adobe walls getting his wagon ready to go back. He had come in, he'd gotten his business done, he was ready to return to camp. He was one of 28 men that were there. Fewer than half of them were hunters. Most of them were clerks, blacksmith, bartender, guys that worked there. There was one woman whose husband ran the southmost store, and the bottom one there. And he, by the way, would in effect kill himself by mishandling a gun. Don't mishandle a buffalo gun, for goodness sake. And he did, and he was the last man killed of 4 at adobe walls. Well, anyway, she was there as a cook. So they had 28 defenders, and little did they know that there were hundreds of warriors about to charge their position. There were, I know a lot of you've been there, perhaps most of you. The buildings all faced east, and if you're looking straight out from the front of those buildings, there's a plateau about 1,000 yards away, roughly. And then to the south, there is a southern plateau that's close to a mile away. And they were gathering on their horses where that lower one was. And they were Comanche, Kiowa, Arapaho warriors, maybe as many as 500 or 600. There was an up-and-coming war leader named Quanah. That name means fragrance, and we would later start calling him Quanah Parker. And he went recruiting with another up-and-coming young leader, charismatic medicine man named Issa-Tai. I'm not going to tell you what that stands for. All the textbooks and stuff say, yes, I am. The textbooks and stuff call them coyote droppings or something like that. The name translates literally to wolf shit. But anyway, they don't put that in the textbooks. That's all right. I always say it anyway. But anyway, they had gone around and recruited from band to band throughout the winter. And they had a very large number of warriors who pretty much committed to them when the weather turned right. And the chiefs decided to send this force against these buffalo hunting intruders at adobe walls. And so their dawn charge was aimed to get those guys. They had scattered around. They knew those guys didn't get up real early, and they were going to try to get them before they got up while the doors were still open and everything. Billy happened to be outside in his wagon, and he saw the movement around that south plateau. He pulled out his buffalo gun, and his idea was to take pot shots at them as they went for the horse herd that was grazing across the creek directly in front of this. He got one shot off and realized that while a few guys were going for the horse herd to gather up those animals, most of them were coming straight for him, he thought. And so after one shot, he sprinted. He took off for Hanrahan's Saloon, the nearest to his wagon. And it was close. They'd already shut the doors. He beats on the doors. They let him in, and they were barricading the doors and windows in all 3 of these buildings, and got it done just in time. Barricades made out of sacks of grain and flour. And the Indians arrived. They tried to kick the doors down with their horses. Quanah was seen getting up on top with a lance and trying to tear through the roof. So others were doing the same thing so they could shoot down in there. The buffalo hunters cast aside their single-shot guns. Everybody was using revolving pistols and lever action Winchesters for rate of fire. They didn't need the powerhouse guns at this point, and there was a half-hour firefight that was just absolutely ferocious. But they beat them off, and they retreated, and they never made another charge like that. It was too costly. Now, Billy got at a window in the saloon to fire from, and beside him was the youngest guy there, Bat Masterson, who was 20. Billy was 23. And the warriors drove off or killed most of the horses. There were some picket fences, as you can see, some corrals, and the Indians, particularly in that upper one, and the Indians couldn't get at those. So what they did was sneak around and shoot those horses. They didn't want the white men to have any means of retreat. They didn't want them to be able to escape at all. While they were at it, they shot the oxen too. There were 28 dead oxen and 56 dead horses there, and it was late June, by the way. And so that would be a problem. Now all those oxen belonged to the Scheidler brothers. There were two brothers who were teamsters. They slept in their wagon, as was their custom, instead of the buildings. And before they knew it, they were with their big old dog too, by the way. And before they knew it, those Indians were all on top of them. They didn't have a chance to make the buildings. They covered up, hoping against hope, that these Indians wouldn't see them. Well, one warrior finally stuck his head in to say, bam, he got shot, but the Indians then swarmed the wagon. And they killed all three of them. I say all three because the dog fought heroically to defend his masters, and so they scalped the two brothers, and as a gesture of honor to the brave dog, they cut a tuft out of his hide, scalped him too. When there was finally a lull in the fighting, the defenders came out and they found 13 Indian corpses, too close to the buildings to be rescued as they normally did. They always carried off their dead and wounded, but there were 13 guys they just couldn't get to. So defiantly, they beheaded those guys, and they stuck their heads on poles on those picket fences, and I found an illustration of that, and it's in the book. Day two, they basically held them at bay. The Indians, those buffalo hunters had the range by now. The Indians, they get down to a sniping contest, and they had Winchesters with open sights, so they started plugging away at them from about 100, 150 yards. Well, that was point blank range for those buffalo guns. The Indians didn't know anything about the buffalo guns, and they shot them to pieces there. Day three, about 15 mounted warriors came out on a plateau. We don't know for sure which plateau. Obviously either the northern or southern one. If the northern one, there have been surveys. 1,028 yards is the closest survey. 1,538 yards is the one down south. At that range, you fire such a shot, and it takes 5.3 seconds to go to 1,500 yards. It's 4.1 second before you ever even hear the report. And so anyway, everybody's saying, Billy, look at those guys. You got to shoot them. If it was the South Plateau, it's 7/8 of a mile away. Yeah, I'll shoot one of them. Which one do you want me to hit? And what he did, everybody's watching, and he was using a barred gun. That's another story that I don't have time to go into. He got a barred gun, and he elevated that thing, maximum elevation, and his idea was not to shoot for an individual Indian. He was going to do a rainbow shot and try to hit the group, hit somebody in that group. And, it could have been a little too long, a little too short, wouldn't hit anything. But by golly, he fired that thing with everybody looking on, no pressure, and he hit a guy, knocked him off his horse, and that broke the back of the attack. The Indians departed the next day. They divided up into war parties, and they attacked the buffalo hunters in their hunting camps. Now, by this time, the Army is planning a sweep of that area. The war was going to be called, as you know, the Red River War. And they were planning a convergence strategy, and there were going to be two columns come up from the south, from Texas, one from the west, that would be Fort Union. Boy, if you've never been over there, go see that thing. That was the Army's principal supply base in the west. It's just adobe ruins today. That thing's huge. So here came a column from the west, here came a column from Camp Supply, just a little bit east of the Panhandle, northeast corner. And then from Fort Dodge, here came Nelson A. Miles with a column from the Dodge City area. By the time they launched these columns in August of '74, Billy Dixon and the other survivors of the battle had finally made it back up to Dodge City. And Billy was hired as a scout at $75 a month. If that doesn't sound like much, a private got paid $13 a month. So that was good money. Furthermore, if they had to carry dispatches, which they did, as it turned out, they were promised a $50 bonus. So that was a good deal. Such a good deal that Billy stayed with it. You know, he wasn't mustered out till February of '83. He stayed in the Army as a scout for 8.5 years. The one major combat, I've got to tell you the first thing that happened when they marched down into the Panhandle. General Miles said, we are camping. We are going to camp at Adobe Walls because I want this guy to show me around. He's talking about a professional soldier. He wanted to see the whole setup. And so they did that. Then they had a battle, a day-long battle, and it was in rough country. The Indians, a large part of Indians were trying to protect their families, and they fought a delaying action. And Billy was in the van with the rest of this large scouting company, and they fought all day long. The next thing he does, in September of '74, he and Amos Chapman, another scout, they were given dispatches to take to Camp Supply. They were also given an escort of 4 enlisted men. And they decided they better travel at night. And that's what they did. They'd gotten almost to the edge of the Panhandle. And they got out one morning and they got hit by 125 warriors. Now think about that, 6 guys versus 125. That was worse odds than Adobe Walls. And everybody was wounded in the first pass. The private who was holding the horses so the rest of them could fight on foot, he took what turned out to be a mortal wound. He died that night. And the Indians ran off with the 6 horses. And Chapman got his knee shattered and his leg was amputated later. And Dixon, you go out there today and it's real brushy, but it was wide open in those days. And they had no cover at all. And Billy spotted a buffalo wallow nearby. And he helped everybody get over there, and they used their knives to dig around and make it a little bit better. And that's where they lasted out the siege. And Billy was instrumental in holding the Indians off. Everybody had little carbines, which were short distance, but Billy had his buffalo gun. And boy, he kept those warriors at a distance, saved their best. So he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and Miles wrote him a personal letter, and he was personally awarded that medal by Miles. Well, you say, okay, they always do a big deal. They didn't then. The Secretary of War mailed the Medal of Honor to the recipients, and that's all that ever happened. But Miles wanted to make a big deal out of this. After the war was over in '75, he spent the rest of his enlistment at Fort Elliott, just north of Mobile. He was there from ages 24 to 32, 8 years, and that's the first time he had had a home as an adult. Not that he wasn't in the field some, but anyway, he had a social life. He liked saloons, and the officers liked to treat him to dinner or drinks, and Masterson, his old buddy, turned up, and other friends. He upgraded his wardrobe, had a Prince Albert coat and vest, and cravat, and a nice hat and everything. He had a pretty good time there. They discontinued the scouting group in '83. He wants another home. He goes back to Adobe Walls, but not to the side of the battle. He thought the other place, the side of the old Bent's fort thing, Bent's trading post, was the more desirable place. And he went there, and he got 2 sections of land, 1,280 acres. The Turkey Tracks Ranch headquarters was to the north, and he rode for the Turkey Tracks for a while, and he built a cottonwood log cabin. And the Turkey Tracks had a couple of sheds. They didn't want any more. He drags those sheds up and packs them onto this place. there was a breezeway, so he planks in that, another room. A settler gave up on the whole deal and left, abandoned his cabin. Billy got the logs out of that cabin. This thing kept growing, and it was one of the biggest houses in the Panhandle. I don't man, it looked real good, but anyway, he did that. And he needed all the room. They appointed him postmaster, and he was a postmaster for years. He ran a post office out of one of those buildings, and the cowboys had come by, and they wanted some candy or maybe tobacco products, but he said they preferred candy and gum. So he had a little store there, and he serves as justice of the peace and Texas land agent, and he irrigated that creek, and a guy came by and sold him a bunch of fruit trees. He had a 200 tree fruit orchard, and about a 30-40 acre alfalfa field, and he sold all that hay. He didn't have very many animals. He sold that hay to the turkey tracks. He did great. He went hunting anytime he wanted to. There weren't very many people around that needed his services. And he led an idyllic life for a decade. And then he met a schoolmarm from back east visiting a cowboy brother. And thus Olive King re-enters our picture. Olive was an adventurous young pioneer woman of the Panhandle. She was a rural schoolmarm who fell in love with the country, but also with an iconic hero of the Texas Panhandle. Now, Olive knew something about Indian fighting heroes. She was born in Virginia, like Billy. She was born in 1873, a year before Adobe Walls, so there was an age gap. Her great-great-grandfather, she was 8th of 10 children, had 5 boys, 5 girls. Her great-great-grandpa was General Andrew Lewis. He was a hero of the French Indian War and of the American Revolution, and in between, in 1774, he led a great victory over the Shawnee at the Battle of Pilot Point, and Point Pleasant, I believe. So Olive, his adventures were drilled into her as a little girl, and she nurtured a sense of history. All of this, Olive's father was a Confederate soldier during the Civil War. Her daddy ran a tobacco farm on the Lewis Grant. Tobacco now is hard on the soil. And so the King farm was about worn out when smallpox visited the family home in the 1880s. 7-year-old Olive was one of several family members who caught it. The only one to die was her daddy. Oldest son already had moved out and become a tobacco broker. And by the way, on a visit home, he's the one who brought the disease with him. The 2 oldest sisters were married and gone, and one of them took the next oldest sister into her home out of state. The next 2 brothers would work the farm, 3 brothers. They were kind of middle children. That left the 3 youngest, 7-year-old Olive, a 4-year-old baby sister, and a toddler brother at home. Yeah, both grandmothers were widowed. They moved in to help with the kids. Man, there are a lot of mouths to feed. So, one of the grandmothers decided little Olive needed to go live with cousin Dora King Wade, who was married to a prosperous building contractor in Decatur, Alabama. And Decatur had been burned to the ground by Yankees during the war. There were 4 buildings left standing. So building contractors had a lot of business. There was a growing town. Cousin Dora had 2 little boys. She was delighted at the opportunity to raise a daughter, quote, quote. Wade's had a big 2-story home with servants. Olive would have her own room, clothes, schooling. She'd never had a room to herself. She hadn't had schooling. She was 7 years old. However, Olive was traumatized. At 7, she was too young to leave her mama, especially after the death of her daddy. She did not want to leave her playmate little sister nor her baby brother. When she departed on a train for Alabama, she tearfully said to her mama, "I'll be good, mother. I'll try so hard and be good." But Olive was treated wonderfully, generously by cousin Dora and her family. She enjoyed comforts undreamed of at the old tobacco farm. She was given piano lessons. They lived across the street, candy carter from Methodist Church. And so like cousin Dora, Olive became a devout Methodist. The big house was open to a circle of her girlfriends. At 16, she finished high school. The Wades offered Cousin Dora and family, said, please go to college. We'll foot the bill. Please do it. Go to a normal, be a teacher, whatever you want to. But by then she longed to be with her mother and the few siblings who remained at the Virginia Tobacco Farm. She hadn't been home at one time in nearly a decade. So after a final summer with Cousin Dora, Olive moved back to the hardscrabble Virginia farm. Her older brothers by this time had all moved out. And two of them, Archie and Albert, in the 1880s, they succumbed to the great adventure of that age, cowboy. Where are you going to do that? Well, they headed for the Texas Panhandle in the 80s to become cowboys on one of America's last frontiers. In time, both of them would become successful ranchers. But when Archie was still a young cowboy on the Bar C's, with a few head of cattle of his own, which they permitted, he married. His wife, Cena, had a little baby boy. Archie wrote his sister, Olive, and she was 19 going on 20 at this point, and he invited her to come to Texas for a visit, and he sent train fare. Well, hey, she was just as adventurous as her cowboy brothers. First, she visited Cousin Dora and her family in Alabama. Hadn't seen them in nearly 4 years. And then she took an 1,100-mile rail journey coming up from the south to Canadian, Texas. Brother Archie picked her up here in a wagon, and they drove 50 miles to his dugout just north of the Canadian River. Olive had a grand time with her brother and his sister-in-law and little nephew. She fell in love with the open, windswept land and the isolated people who lived here. There were picnics and fishing trips. There was a 4th of July dance and a Thanksgiving feast that hosted 30 people at this little old cabin. And 30 people was half the population of the county. You know, the first census of Hudson County had 56 people. And Olive was courted by cowboys. Nothing clicked. So Cena got pregnant again, and she decided, well, as soon as I help her with the pregnancy, I better go home because that dugout's fixing to get crowded. But she didn't want to go back to Virginia, and she lucked out. She was asked to teach at a little 5-student rural school just north of the Canadian River. There were, again, 2 families. One of them had a son who would be the oldest kid in the school, and that was a guy named George Wittenberg. And then the other family had 4 little boys and girls. No room in either house, though, for a school marm, which is kind of customary, but anyway, there was a neighbor, the Lewis family. The Lewis brothers were working up a little spread. And one of them was a bachelor, and he shared a bedroom with the Lewis's boy. And then the other bedroom was Mr. and Mrs. Lewis. There was a kitchen, little picket house, 3-room picket house. And Mrs. Lewis, by golly, she wanted a female companion. She figured out a way to rig a curtain across the corner of this cabin, privacy, you know, and Olive had a place to live. She got certified at the nearest courthouse. Well, there weren't any courthouses very near. You know, each of the few courthouses served several counties. But she went, took the written exam, passed it. She rode horseback to school each day. Old George met her halfway and rode her there. It turned out that Billy Dixon lived 5 miles west of the Lewis family. And one day he brought his wash to Mrs. Lewis, who took in wash from the Cowboys for a little spending money. And he was introduced to Olive. And Mrs. Lewis smelled something, and she became a matchmaker. And man, he came by every week. He was either hunting, had those dogs with him, or he'd bring his wash or pick up his wash, and he started bringing fruit. Now that was a deal. He brought fruit every week from his orchard. Finally, he proposed. They got married at the Lewis home on October 18th, 1894. They found a Methodist circuit rider, and he came up. Billy was 44, Olive was 21. They were soulmates. The age difference didn't apply to them. And Billy's rambling house and adobe walls, he ordered honeymoon sheets from Montgomery Ward through a store here in Canadian. He purchased a majestic stove that was the state-of-the-art wood-burning cooking stove for Olive. And then when she got pregnant, he bought a rocking chair for her from Canadian, and she got a lot of use out of it because she had 8 kids. No, 15 years, 8 kids, no twins. There was no medical assistance. They did ask for a dock a couple of times, and the Canadian River flooded both times. They didn't have all those dams, it flooded. And they did, one of the baby girls died, and they raised 7 kids. But anyway, after a decade, Billy was forced to sell his little spread to the vast Turkey Track Ranch. He had built a 2-story frame house for his growing family, and it was jacked up and moved 14 miles to the first little county seat of Hutchinson County, and that was Plymouth, ghost town now. Billy became a Mason. Okay, he liked that, but he despised town living. Now, Plymouth wasn't much of a town, but anyway, he didn't like living in town. And so he was desperately seeking one more frontier experience. He homesteaded a 160-acre claim in the Oklahoma Panhandle, which had just been opened up. His spread. Now here's the border of the Panhandle, and Billy's claim, by design, was right there on the border. And as a matter of fact, he could look across his fence, and he could see the Buffalo Springs Division headquarters is in a grove of the XIT. The XIT ranch was on the other side of the fence, and it went 200 miles down. He built a 3-room cabin for his family, boys 1 room, girls another. He and the missus and the majestic stove and the other. And then he literally worked himself to death, trying to scratch out a living from this harsh land. He died of pneumonia in 1913. He was 62. Billy and Olive had been married for 19 years, and she now became a widow for the next 43 years after a 19-year marriage. She died in Amarillo in 83 in 1956. A contemporary of hers was another Indian War widow, and that was Libby Custer. Libby lived into her 90s. She was a widow, a professional widow in her case, 53 years. Anyway, Olive, during the 1890s and early 1900s, Olive lived the hard, primitive, isolated life of a pioneer woman. A few years ago in Midland, at a meeting of the West Texas Historical Association, I talked about genus Historianus Herbidus. That was a phrase coined by the great frontier historian C.O. Sonachin. Historianus Herbidus, he said that means grassroots historian. Well, Olive Dixon became a grassroots historian of the front rank. Despite only a high school education, she interviewed her husband late in his life. When he finally decided to talk a little bit, she kept notebooks in every room in the house, and even one, a pencil and notebook, out in the stable. She took everything down, and as a result, she created a classic frontier biography of him. She got the vernacular right. It's something to read. Came out in 1914, year after he died. She had to borrow $500 from a bank at high interest. It was way into the 1920s before she ever got it paid off, but it was worth it. After raising their 7 children, see, when Billy died, oldest daughter was 17, youngest kid, boy, was a toddler. Billy didn't leave him any money. But once Olive, who had to move around a lot and everything, but anyway, somehow she got them married, she got them raised, and then she devoted the rest of her life to her passion, which was history. And she became a charter vice president of the Panhandle and Plains Museum. She was on the building committee of that museum. You walk into the Panhandle and Plains Museum, and you'll see her name engraved above the entrance. She made significant contributions to the holdings of the museum. Billy's Medal of Honor, for instance, the letter from General Miles, that rifle from Fort Elliott, and all kinds of other things. Those were some artifacts to start a museum on. And Olive led the movement to erect a monument, raise the money, erect a monument out in Adobe Walls. That very movement you were showing those people the other day, the monument. She led the movement to erect a monument at Buffalo Wallow, led the movement to move Billy's grave from Tex Line, which is the nearest cemetery, that's where they planted him. Now they're going to move him out to Adobe Walls, and they did, and that took some doing. And the day he was moved, there was a procession through the Panhandle, and everybody knew about it, and they came out, and the men took their hats off as the procession came by. She became involved in all manner of other history projects. She went to Dodge City for whatever they were celebrating at a particular time, and she went to the Custer battlefield on the 50th anniversary. That would have been in 1926. She was asked to speak at all kinds of events. Olive wrote a stream of historical newspaper pieces. She was on the staff at the Amarillo Globe until she died. And she even published a couple of articles in Ranch Romances magazine. I got that a week and a half ago from a guy that knew I was coming out here. He's quite a collector, and without telling me a thing, I guess he was afraid he wouldn't get it in time. He said, "You got to come out here. I got something to give you." I came out there, I had some stuff to give him. And here it is. And this, of course, most of these are romances between cowboys and women. But there is an article in the back. It's a historical article, and it's about the Battle of Buffalo Wallow. And I'm just thrilled to death to have this, get to touch it. It comes from April of 1940. She was getting some years on her by then. Despite her lack of formal training, Olive Dixon became a foremost grassroots historian of the Texas Panhandle. She was a true historianus horridus, and there's been a good book written about her. John L. McCarty, he's the guy that wrote the book about Tascosa, Maverick Town, and they were newspaper colleagues together, and he said, "Mark, she'll be good." And he got that book out about a year before she died. But anyway, I can't thank y'all enough for coming out, for helping us to kind of get things cranked up again in our profession. My thanks to the museum people for hosting us. And I thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you both times. Thank you.
So I'm sure Bill would love to answer any questions that anybody may have. Ms. Jackie?
Okay, so my husband used to read the life of Billy Dixon to my kids.
Yeah.
That was their bedtime story.
Yeah.
And they were fascinated by the Swede's dog and the fact that, was it true that Billy Dixon's dog ran off in the fight?
That's what Billy did, but you start adding up the time,
Yeah.
and that dog had been dead a long time. And I'm not sure I ever bought that.
Gosh, they're going to be so disappointed.
You have to read this book with a great deal of care because Billy took liberties, as I pointed out about his early life. You know, I was the oldest child. No, you weren't. You know. Yeah. And but anyway, what's so good about this thing? I bought a paperback copy of this thing, and I was traveling a lot that summer that I was fixing to sit down and write the book. And I took that paperback and I read and reread it, and I underlined things and highlighted things. I wanted the vernacular in the book, and I tried to use the words that she captured from his mouth, you know. And it was almost like interviewing a guy. Even part of what he said wasn't true. But remember, you know, he was a frontiersman. He grew up around a campfire listening to these guys tell windies. So he knew how to tell some of his own. Yes, sir.
Now, at the Battle of Buffalo Wallow, did they have food or water with them?
Oh, yeah, they did, on their horses.
Oh.
And the Indians came up right off with the horses.
Oh, no.
And a blue norther blew in. And their jackets were on the horses. And they were there in that Buffalo Wallow, and it started filling up. It wasn't but about 10 inches deep. And it started filling up, all those wounded guys. And Billy, they cut some brush and tried to lay them on that, and they were miserable. And the Indians, in the meantime, were sitting off out of range of his gun, which is pretty good ways. And they had their blankets, and they'd use their guns, and they'd put those guns up and hold their blankets over, like they stayed on their horses. But that Blue Norther might have saved their lives. They couldn't do any more attacking. So that was a miserable, miserable situation. And then the son of a gun major that came and relieved them that night, he was mad at them about something. They thought the courier that was riding up was an Indian, and they killed his horse. Anyway, Christians really lucky they didn't kill him. So that got the major mad, and he wouldn't give them rations, he wouldn't give them medical help, anything. And he rode his column on, and some of the men swung their horses by and handed them rations and stuff like that. They had nothing until General Miles came by a day or so later. And Miles immediately, by the way, relieved the major of his command.
Who was that major?
Major.
Price.
What?
Price.
Price. Major Price. Yeah. Yeah. Dixon should have killed him. He could have fired that buffalo gun, they'd have never known where it came from. He could have hit him at 1,000 yards. You may know that there is, you know about the single action fast draw shooting black powder deals that they do. Well, there is a bunch that shoots these buffalo guns. They're made mostly in Italy. There is a Billy Dixon model, and their target is generally at 1,000 yards. And even at that would be a little bit less than the target that they surveyed off, the closest target. But anyway, they really admire that 1,000-yard or 1,500-yard shot that Billy did. Like I said, it's not the bullet that killed Billy, Billy the Kid or Wild Bill Hickok. It was that shot knocked the Indian off so far you could barely see. When I was standing out there, they had a couple of guys out there on top, and they were dressed like Indians. They were on top of the nearer plateau. And I'm telling you, you could hardly see them. And I took a picture of them. It's in my book. And you have to look real careful just to see a couple of dots. And I took it from where we shot. I took that picture from where we were shooting, and from where Billy would have shot. And it was an amazing feat, it really was. And he kept calling it a lucky shot and everything. Well, when I was coaching high school football, Darrell Royal kept saying how lucky he was to win this game. And this game, 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 And Billy made his own luck. He was an artist with a firearm. He was gifted. Yes, sir.
So, kind of folklore that I've always heard is that shot that he actually, the medicine man that we don't pronounce his name.
Issachar, yeah.
That was who he shot, and that's what.
I've always heard that too, but that is folklore. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
They don't.
That's right.
And there's another thing that Issachar, earlier in the fight, remember you got a bunch of buffalo hunters. These guys are good. And then a buffalo hunter shot Issachar's horse. And Issachar had told him, you paint your horse and you paint you, and they're not going to hit you. And the guy hit like a bullseye. There was a ring painted on the horse, and he hit in the ring. He said, see, he didn't hit the ring. Well, they didn't have any use for Issachar from that point on during the battle. And I might mention something about why he had that horrible name. Indians would, during a pregnancy, if a woman had a dream about a big bear, or the husband too, they would name the baby Big Bear. And it might turn out to be the cutest little girl, but she's named Big Bear. And if her life goes well, then the name Big Bear worked. And she would continue to call herself. If her life went poorly, well, she could change her name. Issachar's name obviously was the source of some kind of dream from his parents, and he his life had gone really well up till 1874, and so he did not change his name. You know, I guess he changed it later. You know, probably. Yeah.
Have you ever been out here to the Buffalo Wall
Yes.
place?
Yes, I have. Yeah, that's why I said it's all grown up now. You know, there's all kinds of brush out there now, which there wasn't.
Well, it used to be really bad here.
Yes, yes. I'm sure I never saw it that way. But that's the way it was when they hit. And see, whatever digging tools they had, the horses ran off with those too. And so that they only had their knives, their sheath knives to dig with. So that wasn't much of a defensive perimeter, but better than nothing, I guess. And they held off in great part thanks to Billy's marksmanship at holding those guys at bay.
There was a monument out there. I haven't been out there in
Yes,
years.
oh yeah, it's still there.
Is it still
I
out
got a
there?
picture of it in the book. There's a wonderful. In fact, I think the picture in the book is a picture of when they dedicated it, and Olive is standing beside it, and there's another gentleman on the other side of it.
Well, see, with Miss Dixon, she was a king.
Yes.
Her brother Albert
Yeah.
had children, and you all know who Albert King's granddaughter was? Who? Sandra Mathers.
You know, you got Billy Dixon's namesake back up here in Clipsville. He was
And
named
where?
named after his uncle, named Bill King.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
these other sites, most of these sites, I got drugged to them when I was a kid because my mother was running with Elmer Sparks on the Hysterical Society, they call it. So I got drugged to a couple of these spots. So.
Well, I had the privilege of interviewing for this book
Yeah.
Virginia Maynard,
Yeah.
who was Olive's granddaughter. Well, of course, she was Billy's granddaughter too, but
Right.
he died before she was born. And but she knew her grandmother very well. I think she was a teenager when her grandmother died, and she lived up there. In fact, Olive is buried beside Virginia's parents. It's in a cemetery in the south part of town. Virginia lives, in fact, in a really fine old neighborhood near the junior college in Amarillo. And she was kind enough to host me one day, and I drove up there, and we had a real nice talk, and she shared a lot of family items with me. Anyway. Yes, sir.
Now, how were they able to locate the exact location of the Buffalo Wallow where the battle was? You know, did they leave behind something to go find later?
Yeah. And I Billy knew right where it was, and so did anybody else that had participated in it. The Buffalo Wallow was about 10 feet around, so it was, you could spot it out there in the open, just out there in the open.
Now, was the body still buried there? I mean, didn't they bury the guy?
That private, as far as I know, that private's still buried there, which surprises me because they would
haven't
usually,
done it.
yeah, the guy that died during the night,
Yeah.
they went ahead and buried him there, and I've never heard that he was ever. The Army would usually take these guys back to the fort and bury them in the post cemetery. There wasn't a post yet except for Camp Supply. See, Fort Indian hadn't been built yet. So, as far as I know, that guy's still out there. But I have no idea. Ain't it, Yeah.
Well, with that being private land, though, I doubt seriously if isn't it Meadows
Half place. It's on the half place.
or Half Place?
Yeah.
Well, that's about the same. I doubt if they'd let anybody on there on the place to.
Well, you know, it's farmland after that, and so many people kept going in, they finally put it in CRP grass, where I could show you where it is, because I've been there. But
I've been up
you
there right
can't see, it's just grassland now.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, if there's no other questions, I want to thank everybody. I was hoping we wouldn't have so many semis, but gosh darn it. It didn't work out that way, but thank you.
Thank you for the microphone.